The American nation was born on July 4th, 1776, when 13 colonies declared their independence from Great Britain. But it was not until the groundbreaking year of 1789 that the country had a fully operational national government. That was because 1789 was the first year that the new U.S. Constitution was put into effect. And the Constitution outlined a plan for a national government that the states had agreed upon. Following the guidelines that were written in the new Constitution, George Washington of Virginia was elected to be the first president of the United States of America, and John Adams of Massachusetts was chosen to be his vice president. 2 months after his election, George Washington, at the age of 57, was inaugurated president. He was about to begin the extraordinarily difficult task of leading the world's only democracy, a type of government that hadn't been tried for a very long time. In fact, democracy had succeeded just once, and that was for a brief time back in ancient Greece. In 1789, the year Washington was elected, U.S. territory extended from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River, far beyond the boundaries of the original 13 colonies. Even so, most of North America was not under the control of the United States, for to the north in Canada lay territory controlled by Great Britain, while to the south and west lay territory mostly claimed by Spain. America's nearly 4 million citizens were spread over a very wide area, and the new federal government would serve to unify them all. It would collect taxes, regulate and oversee certain activities of their states, and it would also defend them in times of war. America's first president was a man very much beloved by the citizens of his country. He was a brave man who had led the Continental Army to victory over the British in the War for Independence. And he was a highly respected political leader who had presided over the convention that drew up the U.S. Constitution. Before Washington could start to carry out his duties as president, the United States Congress had to do 2 very important things required of it by the Constitution, and that were essential to a properly functioning national government. The first was to establish the executive departments. These were the departments of State, Treasury, and War that were to be directly under the president's control. The second was to establish the federal court system that Congress created by passing the Judiciary Act of 1789. One of Washington's first jobs as president was to appoint the people who would head these newly created departments. He chose Thomas Jefferson, minister to France during the Revolutionary War, to be his Secretary of State. Jefferson would deal with the nation's relations with foreign countries. Alexander Hamilton, a trusted military aide during the Revolution, was chosen to be his Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton would deal with the nation's financial matters. Henry Knox, a Revolutionary War hero, was selected to be his Secretary of War. Knox would oversee the nation's defense. The heads of the 3 executive departments were the president's closest personal advisors and made up his first presidential cabinet. Furthermore, President Washington nominated John Jay, a prominent lawyer and figure in New York politics, to be Chief Justice of the new Supreme Court, the nation's highest court. And as Washington continued to choose people to serve in the federal government, James Madison, United States Representative from Virginia, proposed 10 amendments to the new Constitution called the Bill of Rights that were designed to safeguard personal freedoms. And as America struggled to put together its new government, a revolution broke out in France in July of 1789. The repercussions of the French Revolution came to have a profound effect on United States foreign policy throughout the 1790s. In January of 1790, the U.S. Congress met here at the Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia, the place where the Declaration of Independence was signed. This building was to serve as the country's temporary capital while decisions about a new U.S. capital city were made. In 1790, one of the most urgent orders of business for the U.S. government was to come up with a way to repay long overdue debts incurred during the Revolutionary War, including such things as the back pay owed to soldiers. Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton worked out a controversial repayment plan to meet this goal. But certain congressmen would only accept his plan if he arranged to have the new U.S. capital city built in the southern part of the country. A location in Maryland, pictured here, was decided upon, and Hamilton's repayment plan was passed. Then, not far from here along the banks of the Potomac River, President Washington selected the exact site where the federal city would someday stand. Interestingly, the spot he chose was just a few miles upstream from his home at Mount Vernon. Once the site had been chosen, a French engineer was hired to design the layout of the new city, which was to be based on a distinctive system of radiating boulevards. In 1791, Congress approved the creation of a privately owned bank called the Bank of the United States to handle the federal government's money. Alexander Hamilton had personally worked to have this bank created, for he believed it would help strengthen the government politically and economically. But Thomas Jefferson deeply opposed the bank, believing it to be a government-supported monopoly. Soon another issue arose that divided these two men, for Hamilton wanted the federal government to take an active role in promoting the development of American industry, and Jefferson did not. At this time, industrialization was just beginning to take hold in America. In fact, the factory in Rhode Island seen here, called Slater's Mill, opened right around the same time Hamilton was making his proposals to Congress. It was the first factory in the nation where water-powered machines were put to use in textile manufacturing. Machines like those in Slater's Mill had brought tremendous wealth to Great Britain, and Hamilton wanted the same thing to happen in the United States. To achieve this goal, Hamilton wanted the federal government to make payments to people who opened new factories, and to enact protective tariffs, special taxes on imported goods. Under this plan, there would be an added incentive to build factories, and untaxed American manufactured goods would become more affordable than similar foreign products upon which taxes were paid. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison were disgusted with Hamilton's plan, saying it represented unnecessary government interference. It was their belief that the federal government should play only a small role in the lives of the American people. Furthermore, Jefferson believed that massive industrialization would breed poverty and the growth of crowded, unhealthy cities. In contrast to Hamilton, Jefferson envisioned an American nation based on small, independent farms, places where a much more wholesome way of life could be pursued. In the end, Jefferson's view prevailed in Congress, and Hamilton's plan for the industrialization of America was defeated. Differing views on government, such as those voiced over the issue of industrialization, were what gave rise to America's first political parties. And by the time the national elections were held in 1792, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, and their supporters had formed the Federalist Party to promote their vision of a federal government that played a large and active role in American life. In opposition, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and their supporters had put together the Democratic-Republican Party to promote the idea of a country with a small federal government that rarely interfered in the lives of its citizens. While the first political parties were forming, 2 new states were added to the United States. Vermont was added in 1791, followed a year later by Kentucky, the 15th state to join the Union. 1791 was also the year the Bill of Rights was ratified by the states. And thanks to this document, Americans were guaranteed the basic freedoms of religion, speech, right to free assembly, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to a speedy trial, and so forth. Slaves, however, were guaranteed no such freedoms under the Bill of Rights, because technically, under the law, they were considered to be items of property. In the early 1790s, the Pacific coast of North America was quite isolated from the United States. No overland route existed to the Pacific shore, and it could only be reached by ships that rounded the tip of South America. There were only a fraction as many people living in the West because European settlement had only begun in 1769, shortly before the outbreak of America's War for Independence. That was the year that Spain started building a string of missions in the region known as Upper California. And so Spanish and Native American cultures, not English culture, dominated the Pacific coast at the time George Washington was in his first term as U.S. President. Back then, the lands north of Spanish California, a region now called the Pacific Northwest, was a place where Europeans had yet to settle. It was a pristine wilderness of towering waterfalls and dense forests, where there were villages of native people that carved incredible masks and totem poles. In 1792, a group of Americans explored this amazing coastline by ship. Their leader was a man named Captain Robert Gray. During these explorations, Gray and his men discovered the mouth of a majestic river, the largest on the Pacific coast, that he named after his ship, the Columbia. In the next century, Gray's explorations proved to be of enormous importance to the United States because they served as the basis for America's claim to the vast Oregon Territory. True or false? The Bill of Rights gave slaves their freedom. True or false? The Federalists wanted a small role for the U.S. government. True or false? Florida became a state during George Washington's first term in office. True or false? John Jay was the first U.S. Secretary of State. True or false? Robert Gray's exploration served as the basis for America's claim to the vast Oregon Territory.